Welcome to Kairos Research Center podcast, Christian faith seeking understanding, intellectual witness, and spiritual renewal.
We come to the last section of our series. We note that the LGBT sexual revolution has become very dominant, especially in the West, but it's been spread globally to the entertainment industries, NGOs, and the United Nations included, and the multinational corporations. The question is, how did the Christianized West abandon biblical morality, and how did the LGBT movement become the dominant social culture revolution movement today? I may be a little bit more philosophical in explaining this. I hope you will be able to follow through. I'll give a little history. Now, we note that Christian morality has always been undergirding Western morality. In the pre-modern world, where his Christian morality was dominant, the wholesome self-individual gets his identity from God and is also integrated in his community. The understanding was that there are moral orders and values. There's a moral order and values instituted by God for providence, the proper ordering of life to be in harmony with God's creation, and for the integration of the individual with his community. The keyword is called Mimesis, M-I-M-E-S-I-S. And that is to discover the meaningful order that God has instituted and then to conform in it. Granted, you note that there is an existence of what they call a properly coordinated hierarchy and harmony of moral values. So to conform to this order is mimesis. But with the advent of modern technology, we think now we can change the order of the world. We can do the things ourselves. The word is poiesis, P-O-I-E-S-I-S. Poiesis sees the world as raw material out of which meaning and purpose can be created by the individual. So that is a change from mimesis to poiesis with the advent of technology. But there is also parallel to that, the rise of atheism and moral relativism beginning from the 17th to the 18th century, when you have the Christian West beginning to abandon faith in providence, and the rise of moral relativism and the what I call moral autonomous self. In his book, Sources of the Self, Charles Taylor, the great social thinker, he highlights 3 points in the modern development of what it means to become a self. What are the modern ideas of the self? A focus on inwardness or inner psychological life as decisive for who we are. 1. 2. The affirmation of ordinary life. In other words, an immanent. There's no transcendence. The immanent frame that defines the modern era. And then 3rd, the notion that nature provides us with an inner moral source. So you notice, from mimesis to poiesis also now leads to a prioritization of the individual inner psychology. So now, to we modern men, we give weight to our feelings and intuitions about our senses of who we are and what the purpose of life is. So these are, you may say, seismic change in the Western civilization. So now you have a lot of transcendence. There's no more reference to God and his ordered creation. So reality, in that sense, is now something we can manipulate according to our wills and desire, and not something that we necessarily accept or conform ourselves to. Let me just say, I am making a lot of references to the book by Carl Trueman, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. I shall be quoting him extensively for convenience. And he himself depended very much on Charles Taylor. So in the sense, I will just quote from Carl Trueman. So now, we can manipulate reality to something we accept rather than conform passively to reality. And one of the names that started this is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. We know him as a writer on democracy. But he's the one who talks about the inner self. He says the individual, Rousseau, in contrast to talk about sin, he says the individual is naturally good. He is at his best. He is most truly himself as he should be. when he acts in accordance to his nature. And so man is truly free when he follows the depth of his heart by his conscience and reason and listen to his inner voice. He is truly free and authentic when he is free to be himself. In short, our access to the true order of the world and our place in it is thus primarily inward. The inward self gives us the true reality. So there's a shift from mimesis to poiesis. Because in that case, if society and culture is merely a social construct, and if nature possesses no intrinsic meaning and purpose, then what meaning there is there must be created by human beings. Meaning is not conferred by God. Meaning is now created by human beings themselves. So, a prioritization of the individual inner psychology, our feelings and intuition. In other words, we create our self-identity and define our purpose. We don't look to the Bible, we don't look to God. So, very exciting. We can do what we want for ourselves. But the outcome is what Truman called the plastic people. He says this: now we have become psychological, we look inward. Psychological man is indeed a plastic person, a figure whose very psychological essence means that he can, or at least thinks he can, make and remake personal identity at will. The emergence of the types of self now that characterize our world, namely the elimination of the notion that human nature is something that has authority over us as individuals, is gone. Underwritten now by an easy credit consumerist self-creation is the order of the day. We satisfy our desire. It's a self-consummation, you may want to say. So repeat, the inwardness of ourselves. We are inherently good. Not only that, if that's the case, we must express ourselves. And so comes a key term called expressive individualism, which comes from Charles Taylor. We must be expressing our individualism in order to be authentic. Charles Taylor described expressive individualism. He says, each one of us finds our meaning by giving ourselves to our own feelings and desire. This is what to be authentic, you may want to say. And then he says, this understanding of life, expressive individualism, which emerges in the romantic movement in Europe, 18th century or so, 19th century, romantic expressivism in the 18th century. Each one of us has his or own way of finding our humanity. And it's important we live out our own humanity rather than surrender and conform to the model that is imposed from us outside, whether by religion or education or political authority. So you see the shift. Then comes another seismic shift. So now we are at liberty to create ourselves. What may we create and recreate ourselves? Is it just our outlook identity? Now comes the strongest of all. That's even our sexuality and gender can be changed. According to Judith Butler, basically, you're a man, woman. In the past, sex and gender tend to be identical. According to Judith Butler, gender is not identical with biological sex. They're different. Sex is biological. Gender is cultural. And therefore, there's leeway to change. But more seriously, and what many activists actually fail to take note, for Judith Butler, gender is acts and gesture. What's a gesture? A gesture is an action that you do to convey meaning. In other words, gender is learned. Gender is produced by our action. Gender is what we create. Each one of us create and recreates category of males and females as we enact permissible masculine and feminine roles. So, in that sense, gender is what you make of yourself, not just culturally relative. Now, a gesture, this is a very significant word that people miss, the activists all miss. We may do with that. So what is gender identity? Let me just go a bit further. Gender identity, rather than being the sexual identity, which is biological or genetic now, it says gender identity, according to the American Psychological Association, says it's a person's internal sense of male and female and something else. Can be contrary to what is assigned to them at birth. In other words, gender is what you feel rather than reality. Now it has become, so gender now defines your sexual identity. It's not your biological. And so if you are, depending on your feeling, and especially small children now influenced by LGBT teachers in the West. They may be boys, the teacher will say, you're a girl. In the Asia, teacher knows everything. So, and you accept the teacher's prompting, then you feel a disconnect between what you are biologically as a male. Now the teacher says you can be a female. It has become very stressful, and this state of stressful distress, unhappiness, is the phrase of gender dysphoria. There is no longer a matching of your apparent inherited sexual identity, male or female. Now the teacher tell you it's something different. You now feel a disjunction. After all, while in the past your gender is more or less overlapping with your sexual identity, now the teacher say it's an act. Gender is not fixed. It's a gesture. It's a performance. It's what you make of yourself. Now you notice the phrase, a person's gender can be contrary to what is assigned to them at birth. You notice this mischievous words, assigned at birth, at will. No, you may say, in a sense, sex isn't just assigned in the sense of being imposed by outside. The sexual identity is not an imposition. The sexual identity is a recognition of the biological bodily fact through the sexual organs that is seen in the baby boy or baby girl. So, in that sense, it's not assigned. Sex is a recognition of your fundamental biological identity. So, yeah, I recognize that in different cultures, sometimes the role of men and women can have some flexibility. Where the LGBT activists say, oh, there you see, it's flexible, there's no limit. No, my contention is that while culture may shape gender expression to some extent, it's always able to shape gender expression within the limits of biological sex. And let me put a very clear sexual development. How widespread is this? According to an earlier study by Annie Fausto Sterling, he claims that this DSD, disorders of sexual development, can be as high as 1.7%, which is very, very frightening. But further studies shows that this ambiguous external genitalia, a mismatch between internal and external reproductive organs, or incomplete reproductive organs, or deformation of having the two sets of the same organ, these are actually chromosomal or hormonal defects. All the studies shows that the number is 1 over 5,000 births of such possibility, not 1.7%. It's 0.018%. 100 times less than the earlier claims. So that's one thing. Let's set the statistics correct. Even 1 in 5,000 also seems a bit strange to me, although do you come across 1 over 5,000 in the people you meet having this? I mean, well, it's much less anyway. And there is a spectrum of what is the disorder. Then secondly, people with DSD do not constitute a third sex the way LGBT people say, so that it gives allowance to other sexual identity. You may say DSD are pathological disorder in the development and formation of a male and female body. In other words, you can expect a normal development in the sexual organs, but a formation. And sadly, in the foreign world, you have people born with different deformities, including sexual organ deformities. So rather than say these are affirmation of sexual differences, meaning you could have more than just two orders of male and female, rather genetically we will say these are disorders based on aberration, deviation from our understanding of the proper function or system of the organism, meaning we expect a normal human development. And so DSD is not transgender opportunity. But nonetheless, based on this exaggeration, the LGBT movement now promote that there is a need. So you have not DSD, but gender dysphoria. Boys and girls as old as 9 years old in the certain parts of the US may now make arrangement with the parent, with the teachers to change their sex surgically without or hormonally without informing the parents. And they call this transgender transition care. It's a care which is a euphemism. If the care goes beyond psychotherapy, which without parental permission, it goes to hormonal therapy, the feminized or masculinize the body. If it even calls for surgery to alter the primary and secondary sexual organs and characteristics, this is not care. This is an abuse without parental permission and influencing young boys and girls before they can discern themselves properly. So in that sense, sexual reassignment surgery, which is advocated by the LGBT activists, has become more common. But there's a history to it. The foremost institution in the past that was pioneering SRS, sex reassignment surgery, was actually Johns Hopkins University. But interestingly, from 1930 onwards, they started doing it. There is this psychiatrist called Paul McHugh, Paul-McHugh. He was director there for many years, and then in 1979, based on studies, after he was 16 years the director of the school, SRS was stopped. One of the arguments was, if we ignore gender dysphoria, we do not treat the stress of these people, then they psychologically they get depressed. You have even suicide claims to be the case. He found in his study, Paul Hill, that 80 to 90% of the children who express a discordant gender identity in their young stage eventually will recognize their own bodily and natural development if we just let them develop as they are. You know, there are some tomboys when they're young, and then they grow up into fine ladies. If we leave them as they are, don't go and intervene before they finish the final process. So, and then he also argued that all the claims that in assigning SRS, suicide treatment will be reduced, there was no such case. In fact, people who have transition surgery are 19 times more likely than average to die by suicide. This is in the certain studies. But unfortunately, what Paul Hill has stopped earlier, based on increasing pressure from the LGBT movement, Boston University also now resume SRS and prescribe puberty blockers, hormones since 2009. And so SRS was reassigned in the hospitals that were following Johns Hopkins University. So this is where they are. The point I want to say in this example is that do not take the claims, but we can look at other studies. I will just note that the transgender movement is based on what shall I call as highly inherent and subjective incoherent worldview. Why? Let me just look at the argument. One moment they say gender identity is innate and immutable from birth. Some of these people say, I'm a woman in a man's body from young and it's unchangeable. The only way I can change it is sexual reassignment surgery. So it's innate. And then on the other hand, they say, oh, gender identity is not innate. Why? Because it depends on my own inner feeling. It's not a physical reality. So changing feelings now cannot be innate. So on the one hand, when it suits them, they say gender is innate. I am a woman born in a man's body, so I must change to become a woman. And then this moment, they say gender identity is determined by my feeling. After all, it's also a construct. If it is, how can it be innate if, according to Butler, gender is a social construct and a gesture? So it is highly subjective. Why is the transgender movement pushing so hard? To me, it's very simple. The argument is the assumption of the transgender movement is that gender distinction and boundaries are repressive imposition of a society. They are pushed onto us. And transgenderism in that case is the rebellion against to overcome sexual distinction. Now, let me go into a brief history. It's a philosophical history. The idea that sexual difference is a social imposition and repression came from Wilhelm Reich, 1940s, where he argues that social control, especially existing from the parent and child, is basically a control. Morality is also not absolute, it's imposed on the child. And then social structure is also a control. And therefore, sexual differences of male and female, the way society has pushed it to us, is a form of social control. All these are social constructs, and therefore, it means that we have to deconstruct it. Let me just repeat. Beginning Wilhelm Reich in the 1940s, sexual distinction is a symptom of social repression. And so therefore, they must, social structure based on heterosexuality must be overcome and transcended in order that we may become truly ourselves. So, Anthony Giddens, and then, in other words, sex control is political, and therefore we must overthrow political structure. Anthony Giddens, who weaved a spell in Cambridge in the 1980s when I was there, he says, following Reich, he says, Reich believed that social political reform without sexual liberation is impossible. Freedom and sexual health are the same thing. And then they appeal to Freud. If Freud identified happiness with sexual gratification, then the way to create a happy society, one untainted by selfishness and craven pursuits of power, was allowed for a maximum amount of sexual gratification. So that was Reich's basic idea. The political question of freedom could therefore only be answered through sexual liberation. Anthony Giddens summarizing their views. It's not his personal view, I suspect. I think so. So another name that added in the sexual revolution is the word Herbert Marcuse. Herbert Marcuse, Marcuse. He was the one who combined sexual liberation with Freud and Marx. So he combined Freud, Marx, and Rousseau, and you have what is called the critical theory of sexual identity. To follow Rousseau, it also summarizes the history background of the LGBT movement. To follow Rousseau is to make identity psychological. To follow Freud is to make psychology and thus identity sexual. To match this combination with Marx is to make this identity and therefore sex politics. So sex has become politics. To transform society politically, one must transform society sexually and psychologically. So where once oppression was seen in terms of economic realities like poverty, or legal categories like slavery or lack of freedom, now the matter is more subtle because it relates the issue of psychology and self-consciousness. To summarize, the political sphere is now internalized and subjectivized, and so you can see if liberation has therefore must necessarily be revolutionary in throwing off social structures. So you may say there is a revolutionary imperative in psychologizing of our sex and seeing sex as sexual distinction as repressive. And you add on to that now, you have the rise of the psychological man. I am who I am what I make of my inner self. Imperative, I must be myself, even if especially means overthrowing society and social structure.